wise man Tyler Durden once asked, how much can you know about yourself if you've never been in a fight? Well, my next guest, Chris Camozzi, has been in a bunch of fights, over 40 professional fights, in fact, many of those for the UFC, but now he spends most of his time fighting for the BKFC, which is the Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship. We talk a lot about the fight game, some of the technical details, and the lessons learned, of course, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Here's Chris Camozzi. Mr. Camozzi, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing real well. How's your body feeling, man? After a long career and in the fight game for quite a long time, how's your body feeling these days?
Not too bad. I mean, I feel definitely a little bit older than I probably am, but I've been fortunate. I haven't had a ton of major injuries or anything like that. So I would say it feels, I'm 37. I probably feel 50, but I mean, that's not too bad, right?
That's not bad at all. I'm in like the 70, 80 range.
I always tell people it's not the year of the car, it's the mileage, because everybody's like, oh, you're young, but I'm like, I've been fighting for almost 18 years too. It's a little different than having an office job.
It's super different. And it's crazy how, athletes are in the best shape of anybody, but at the end of the day, it really breaks your body down, right? There's a point of diminishing return. You see it with all athletes, like basketball players, anybody, when they retire, they can barely walk.
Yeah. And then, jiu-jitsu and wrestling, as you know, and boxing, getting punched in general, kicked, it doesn't help for the aging process. That's for sure.
I know, man. So no major injuries at all. I mean, what's the worst you've gotten over the last, what have you been fighting about? Probably 20 years now, huh?
I think I'm on 18 now. I turned professional, I think, when I was 19, started fighting at 18.
Yeah, so you're right there.
So yeah, I mean, the worst injury I've had, I broke my jaw in The Ultimate Fighter, but I would say the worst was I fought Lorenz Larkin on a UFC Fight for the Troops. And even though it wasn't like the most painful injury, I got a retinal abrasion is what they called it. So I went blind in an eye for like a month. It didn't really hurt. But the biggest thing was I had to sleep sitting up for like a month, because they were like, you have to be upright so that the blood can like drain out, because there was so much blood in my eye, I couldn't see. And it was weird. It was a weird feeling because it happened like in the first round. And so going into a fight with one eye when somebody's trying to take your head off, and like I kept losing him in my vision and being like, wait, where did he go?
So you were able to keep going.
Yeah, I lost a decision, unfortunately. But at the end of the fight, you do your medicals and stuff. And I was telling my corner between rounds, I'm like, man, I can't see. And I was like, everything's good. Like, I knew it wasn't a broken orbital or anything, but I was like, I can't see anything. So after the fight, you go back, you do the medicals, right when you get to the back, there's doctors all over you with the UFC. And so they had an eye doctor, or I think it was an eye doctor, Dr. Shu for the UFC. I think he's like an ophthalmologist. He was like shining a light in my eye and covering the other one. And he's like, all right, what do you see? And I was like, I can't see anything. He had like a mag light too. I was like, I can't see anything. And he's like, nothing? And I was like, no, I can't see anything. And he's like, all right, we got to put you in an ambulance right now. And they called in a ophthalmologist. It was in Nashville, to come at like, I don't know, 9:00 at night and see me. And then they determined that's what it was. At least it wasn't like a torn retina or anything like that.
Absolutely brutal. Just eye pokes in general are super brutal.
Yeah, it wasn't even a poke. It was a punch. I mean, there was no point where I ever felt poked in the eye. Like I didn't get the like watered up eye or anything.
Right.
It was like a punch. And I think all I can think of is like the corner of his glove like went straight in my eyeball, or maybe a knuckle. I don't know.
Well, take us back a little bit. Take us back to the early part of your life, to your childhood, how you grew up, and then eventually how you got into martial arts.
Yeah, I mean, so let's see. Early part of my life, I was always like a rough kid. Like I always enjoyed like physical sports, and I had an obsession with like fighting even as a kid, like I liked all the like Jean-Claude Van Damme movies, all the like action movies and ninjas, stuff like that. Like I think I was a ninja for Halloween for probably like
every year.
Yeah. There was years where I was like an army soldier or something, but I was involved in like every sport that you could think of, from swimming, soccer, baseball, football, rugby, wrestling, every sport I wanted to do. I was good at all of them. I wasn't amazing at all of them, but I was always like decent. I was never the worst on the team, which was like, that's always good to look back
For
on.
sure.
But I would say my love of martial arts started with wrestling. I did karate as a kid, but I never got any belts, and all I wanted to do was go to like the sparring days. And my sister kept getting like all these belts because she would learn like the katas, and I had no interest in learning any of those, so they never promoted me at all. So then I was like, well, if I'm not getting these belts and then I can't like go to the sparring all the time, I didn't want to go to the classes where you just stand there in the mirror and like do them as a little kid. So left that, and then fast forward to, let's see, I was probably like 13 when I started wrestling, and then I was obsessed with wrestling, and I was good at it through high school and stuff. And then,
Where'd you grow up, Chris?
so I originally grew up in the Bay Area. So like I lived in Concord most of my life in California, and then moved to Denver in middle school and started wrestling and stuff. And yeah, after wrestling, I went to college for a year and I played rugby there. And then once rugby was done there, I was like, this school is not really for me. And then I came back home and was just working shitty jobs that were terrible, that I'd probably still be at if I didn't find MMA and martial arts. Because I had some old wrestling buddies that were training at a gym. They were like, oh, you got to come with us. Like, come check out this gym. It's jiu-jitsu and stuff. And I'd seen the early UFCs, and I'd seen Hoist Gracie and yada, yada. But to me, I didn't understand that like you could go do that anywhere. I just saw them on TV and were like, wow, that's cool.
I talk about that all the time, man. It's like, it's interesting because it wasn't, back in the day, it wasn't obvious that you could just go train.
No.
It's like you never grew up thinking you could just go shoot hoops with Magic Johnson or something. It wasn't obvious that you could go participate. I had that same experience.
Yeah, exactly. So I went to this gym, and then I'm super fortunate, and I think that you'll understand this. I happened to walk into a gym that was like very legitimate and good because I didn't do any research at all. I was like, yeah, if you guys are going there, cool, I'll go.
Yeah.
And luckily enough, I went to a gym that was owned by a guy named Brad Gum. I don't know if you heard of him. It's Gumm, but he was already a black belt under Higa Machado, and then he had like 20 something fights. He fought in the early UFCs. So he was like a well-established guy. Dwayne Ludwig and Nate Marquardt were 2 or 3 of the people in the Denver area that were actually doing stuff. And it was by pure luck that I walked into that gym. Because again, I didn't look it up. I didn't look at a website, anything. I could have gone to one of those like McDojos. I could have been learning like death touches and stuff,
Yeah.
where people are just falling down. So yeah, that started my career. I trained for about 6 months and then had my first fight. And nowadays that would be very early, right? But back then,
It was normal.
yeah, back then the local fights and stuff, everybody knew one skill. They weren't very well rounded. When I go to the local fights now, I'm like amazed by like how good people are. Yeah, I knew how to wrestle, and then I knew jiu-jitsu pretty well. My striking was like, because Brad was more of a ground guy. But you could win with that stuff. You can't do that now.
Dude, 6 months of jiu-jitsu, you're a seasoned vet back in the day.
Yeah, back then, if you were a blue belt, people were like, wow, like, where'd you get that? But the gym I started at was really small, and I'm actually like really glad about that. I didn't go to, because there were some big gyms still around back then, like Jackson's and stuff. Maybe they came on the map a little bit later, but
What year are we talking right now?
2005 or 6, somewhere in there. But mine was like a 3,000, maybe 3,000 square foot studio. 3,000 might be generous. And it only had a mat and then 3 heavy bags, and that was it. And we put holes through the drywall, everything, like destroyed the place. But it was like gladiator school. Like we didn't have weight classes then. We didn't have anything. Like if it was your turn to be in, because there was only like 3 people or 3 groups on the mat at a time, that's all we could fit. If it was your turn to be in, which everybody was waiting, then you went. It didn't matter if you were 125 pounds or if you were 270 pounds, 300 pounds. Your turn, it's your turn. And we did that with sparring, everything. And it got wild. But yeah, I think I'm super fortunate to come up like that, because it like taught me the grit and like getting beat up by like guys that have been doing it longer. It's very humbling. I'm
Ooh,
sure you remember from starting jiu-jitsu.
Jesus. Were you doing smoker fights at that time, amateur fights, or were there even really quote unquote amateur fights at that time?
So I did one amateur fight, right? And I always tell um, newer guys when they lose this. So I did one amateur fight and I lost a split decision. It was a great fight. It was very entertaining. I didn't know as much as I thought I knew going against another guy who had actually trained, because I'm sure you went through this too. Like, everybody thinks they're the toughest person, and then you actually go train and you realize, like, well, okay, I'm not that tough. Same thing with the fights. There's always somebody bigger, better, or whatever. And I fought at heavyweight, but I didn't cut any weight. I think I weighed 206. I didn't even know the guy was fighting until we showed up, because back then there was no like record, there was no like database, anything. When I got there, I was like, yeah, who's this guy? Like, I kept looking. I'm like, who would be my size? And the guy was like a lot bigger. He's like a big, like jacked military guy. Super humbling. It's funny. I haven't thought about this in a while.
Yeah, man. I mean, you have that fighter spirit. I mean, even through talking to you, and I don't know you that well, Chris, but I mean, just from your record alone, what's your record? I think I looked on SureDog a couple days ago, but it's like 27 and 14 or 15 professionally.
I'm not even sure. When people ask me that, they think I'm lying. Like, they think I have a bad record. Because I always tell people, I think I've had 52 fights, but
Unbelievable.
I actually don't know my record.
Well, point being is that like a lot of people put a lot of emphasis on that L column, you know? To me, it's always been like those are the fighters that I like that are battle tested and seasoned because it shows that you have that fighter spirit. Some of my favorite fighters ever, Dan Henderson, Nate Diaz, Sakuraba, they all have taken a bunch of losses, but they get in there and they give it and they take it. So when I saw your record, I was
Yeah.
like, oh, this guy is he's a fighter. I much prefer that than the good athlete that doesn't take any damage and then folds under adversity. You get some of these guys can cruise through because they're so athletic and they don't take any damage, and maybe they even become a champion, but it's not really it doesn't really exhibit the fighter spirit that I love.
Yeah, I'm with you. That's the thing I think that really blew up MMA, if you think about it, because I'm a big boxing fan, but I like old school boxing more than I like it now, because the biggest boxers and like the guys that should fight won't fight because it's always a money thing. So MMA guys actually most of them have a lot of losses. And in boxing, that would be a career ender. If you've got, call it 3 to 5 losses,
It's over.
you're not even considered a contender. But they don't fight. They're groomed so much. I mean, most boxers will fight 20 fights before they even fight anybody worthwhile. Everybody they fight in those 20 fights is a journeyman.
Yeah, you never get the Hagler Hearns anymore, the Sugar Ray Leonard, Hagler fights. You don't get those, the Duran fights. You don't see them anymore.
Yeah, that was one thing I'll give Tank Garcia, or Tank and Ryan Garcia.
Yes.
They're two young guys that were at the top of their game, and they fought each other. I think that made a statement for boxing.
But talk us a little bit through your journey and the ups and downs, a lot of people talk about the successes, but talk a little bit about the setbacks that you faced over your career. Did you ever feel like you wanted to walk away when you were taking some of those losses? But I'm sure you learned a lot. Take us a little bit through just the ups and downs of the fight game.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there was never a point I wanted to walk away. Like, even now, I'm not fighting because I need to, which is great. Um, I've always owned my own businesses and worked and done things over the years. I never fully relied on fighting, but when I was in the UFC, I did. So before I go back, like in the UFC and when I was fighting for a living, you fight, you make a bunch of money, and then you don't fight for a long time. So you just watch your bank account like go down, then back up, then down. Now I'm in a point where I'm fighting because I love it still. I'm 37, which is technically very old for an athlete, but I still enjoy going to the gym every day and training. As soon as I don't is when I'm going to leave. But, I think I got another year, maybe 2 left of enjoying it before I don't want to like completely break myself. But I've had a lot of ups and downs. So a lot of the ups, I mean, you can see them. So I'll share some of the downs. I mean, there's points where I was very down. There was a point I fought a guy named Nick Rossborough. I don't know if you ever heard of him. I think he fought for like Strike Force. He might have been in the UFC too. He ended up going to heavyweight, but one of my first like tougher fights, you know, I was winning the fight and everything, and I got triangle choked in the third round here locally. But the WEC, so Reed Harris from the WEC told me, win this fight, you're in the WEC. And I had been almost undefeated until then. I ended up losing that fight, and that like crushed me. And I remember telling my coach, Brad Gum, I'm like, man, I was supposed to go to the WEC. This is everything I work for and everything. And he was like, well, it happens for a reason. He gave me the best advice. He's like, it happens for a reason. It's not your time to go there yet. So we're going to take some more fights. We're going to get more experience and bigger shows against tougher guys. He never like shielded me from anything, which is good. He didn't try to like pick and choose opponents that like he knew I would crush. We took pretty much every fight. There's a give and take to that. You know, it could be argued, but no grooming, I guess, of like soft and then throw you in.
No boxing.
Yeah. I fought Jesse Forbes, was one of my first fights on TV. That was for HDNet. I don't know if you remember that.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, I dominated the entire fight till the third round. I got armbarred. I slipped in blood. It wasn't my blood. We got the bloodiest fight of 2008 on Boss Rutan's show back then. I think it was Inside MMA. I cut him like every which way.
With elbows?
Yeah. And in the third round, he was on his back, and I was just like raining down elbows, punches, everything. And I threw, and I like overshot, and I slipped in blood. And it couldn't have fallen more perfect, because him and I are friends now too. And he was like, dude, that was the Hail Mary. Like, your arm fell literally between my legs, and I just squeezed. He's like, I couldn't see. There was blood everywhere. All I knew was I had your arm, and I just like, and he ended up popping my elbow. So that one sucked, because I was like, this is my moment. It was like main event on TV, first one on TV. But you know, it's about resilience. Like, if you're doing something you love, you just keep going back. I mean, I was back in the gym a week later, like wanting to get it back. I think that drive is what like keeps you going. Back then I used to go home from training and I would email every promoter. I didn't have a manager or anything. I would just be doing detective work online on shows, find the promoter's email, send them a thing. And they wrote me back and they're like, hey, can you make weight in, I think it was 2 weeks in Canada. So I had to get a passport. I had to rush it. I hadn't been out of the country, all these things. And I was like, done, I'll do it. We're showing up. I think I got like $700 for it.
Oh my God.
I flew to Edmonton, and it was the main event on TV. And then, you know, I've won a bunch in between these, and finally I get a call from the Ultimate Fighter for season 7 to go on the show. I go do the interview process and everything. They liked me, but they ended up making me the alternate for the show. So I didn't get on the show, which was a bummer. I had to fly to Vegas while they were filming, and I was the alternate. So if somebody got hurt or didn't make weight or whatever, I was in. And then, of course, that's the one season everybody was in. Because prior to that, you know, people had fallen out. So I was like, oh, I'm getting on the show. So I go home, win some more fights, and then season 11 comes around, and they call me back, and they're like, hey, you don't have to do the interviews. You don't have to do anything. We liked you before. Just apply, and most likely you're on the show. So I did that, and I made it to season 11. You know, before that, I had beaten a few UFC veterans. I think I beat Chad Reiner literally like a week or two before the casting stuff. So I sent it to them. Yeah, so I got on the show. And then, of course, there's another speed bump. I fight Victor O'Donnell on the show. They didn't tell us if we were fighting when we got there or if you were just on, because they changed it up each season. As soon as I went to the airport, I saw that there was a return ticket already booked, like popped up when I was checking in. So I called my coach and I was like, hey, I'm definitely fighting because there's a return ticket booked for me in a few days. So when I get there, I'm fighting. We found out who the day before at weigh-ins. They did the selection at weigh-ins, and then they're like, you're fighting tomorrow night. And I was friends with Victor O'Donnell, too, from Ohio. So him and I had on the Ultimate Fighter, there are 2-round fights and then a sudden death round. So we fought 2 rounds of just smashing each other, and we go to an extra round. I win the extra round. I broke his orbital, but he broke my jaw.
Fuck.
And I watched it like a year ago, and it's like when I watch it now, it makes me cringe of how sloppy and bad it was. It also makes me like proud that like we were just going for it. Not the best technique or anything, just going for it.
When he clipped you, did you feel it right away? Did you feel your jaw go?
No, I didn't know at all. So, I mean, it hurt. I won the fight, and then we went to the house that night, and then you pick your room and all this stuff. So I was there like a week and a half, but I couldn't eat any food or anything. I was just like using the like tap out protein and everything, not telling anybody. And then when they realized, like, because I was sparring and training at practice, but every time I would get hit, I would like have to stop for a second. So they took me to a dentist, and the dentist in Vegas told me that I had broken some teeth in the back. So literally, this is actually hilarious. I wish I knew who this dentist was now so I could berate him. They take me, he's like, some of your teeth are broken. They take me to the dentist, and they're getting ready to pull my teeth. He's like, we got to pull it, and then you'll be good. I think this guy was just cashing in on the UFC like insurance money. The UFC saved me from that. I'll give him that. Dr. Davidson, who still works for the UFC, comes in. Literally, I'm in the chair, everything. They're like numbing me up, getting ready to pull my teeth. He walks in, and he was like, stop what you're doing. I need you to look at this x-ray. And they put it up in the room. I'm in the room, and Dr. Davidson slaps the x-ray on the table. And he's like, his teeth are fine. His jaw is broken. So I had a fracture right here. And he's like, you're not pulling any of his teeth. And he like grabbed me, and we left.
Oh my God.
And leaving, Dr. Davidson goes, do you know how bad that would probably hurt for them to pull like healthy teeth? I go back, and I'm like, all right, cool, we're good. I get to the training center, and Dana's like, hey, we got to have a meeting. So they film it and everything. They bring everybody in. And at this point, I'm too naive and stupid to even know that I'm getting kicked off the show. I go in there thinking like, oh, maybe I'm fighting tomorrow, because they were doing the fight selection too. And Dana was like, hey, great job. You know, you won your fight and everything. You're not leaving on a loss, but you can't continue in the tournament because you can't get sanctioned to fight. Like, your jaw is broken.
Yeah.
So literally, I don't even get to go back to the house. The production crew throws all my shit in a garbage bag, and they take me to a hotel. I don't get to say bye. Nothing. Like,
How long were you in the house for?
I think it was like a week and a half. So I'm only on a few episodes from that season.
How was the experience overall? Was it good?
No, I mean, it was terrible. Yeah, it's like being in jail. Like, I mean, they give you a mansion, right? So not quite like jail. They give you a mansion. They'll buy you all this food, whatever, but there is nothing to do. And you're surrounded by people that either you're going to fight, you don't know, and you don't get along with, because some of them are loud. Some of them are there to be serious. Those production crews literally, they don't script it, because people always ask me this. They don't script the show, but you do personality tests, all right? So they pick conflicting personalities on purpose, and they throw it in the pot, and they'll be like, watch this. Something's going to get lit on fire.
They don't have to script it. Yeah. It's just alchemy.
A bunch of fighters in a house with nothing to do, something will happen. So time just like drags by. There's no TV, no books, no magazines, no contact with the outside world. You don't know what's going on. You just go train, and then you have to hang out in this house and live in, I didn't have my own room. I lived with Court McGee and like 4 other guys.
Yeah.
You have no privacy, no like getaway. That week and a half felt like 6 months.
How long do they actually film for usually?
It's only 6 weeks. I say only, but the thing people don't realize is the winner of those shows, they're tough motherfuckers. Sorry, I don't know if I can say motherfucker, but
No, you definitely can. Tough motherfuckers.
6 weeks, you fight 3 times to win the show.
Crazy. That's old school.
Yeah, I mean, you fight a lot. And then the guys that cut weight, you have to make weight 3 times in 6 weeks. There's way more to it than people realize. And like just the mental, some guys have kids and families that they can't talk to at all. You're locked up. That'll make you go crazy too. But so yeah, that would be probably my biggest like down depression slope from fighting. They didn't actually give me any like nothing that would happen from there, right? I just got sent home. And so I thought that was like my UFC chance. They didn't say one word like, oh, we'll bring you back, we'll do this, whatever, nothing. Go home, maybe you'll hear from us. It was maybe you'll hear from us. I'm like, awesome. So I go home, and I quit my job to be on the show, everything. I was like, I'm leaving for 6 weeks.
All in.
And I come back a week and a half later, and people are like, wait, I thought you were leaving. I'm like, well, you know, so I ended up working at a tech company. Oddly enough, I have no experience in tech. I got a job at a tech company doing sales. I didn't even know what we sold. It was a friend of mine who owned the company. And I get this job and I'm working and letting my jaw heal. I didn't have to get it wired shut because it had been a week and a half already. They're like, it's healing. Just don't eat solid food and don't train. And so I'm like, perfect. So I'm working a job, and then I get a call from, at the time I did have a manager right before going on the Ultimate Fighter. And he was like, hey, you're on the finale. I'm like, awesome. So I didn't lose. So they said that I could come back on the finale and fight. I won that fight. So I got a UFC contract off that. And it was the best thing, actually, aside from winning the show, because the Ultimate Fighter contracts suck. They're terrible. The money is terrible, and you're locked in for, I think it's 2 years. So I got to fight on the finale, but they signed me to a regular contract in the UFC. So I was actually making more money than the guy that won the show. But yeah, so I won my fight on the finale and then got my UFC contract from there. And I was off the Ultimate Fighter contract. So the other guys were jealous, actually. I didn't have to live in the house for 6 weeks, and I got to show up on the finale and fight.
Take us through a little bit of the UFC career. How did you like fighting in that organization? You fought in a few organizations now. How was your experience with the UFC?
So I actually got released from the UFC, I think twice in my career with them. It was up and down. It was very rocky. You know, I wasn't dominating. I wasn't a serious contender at the time, but my experience with them was great. I mean, they still now there's nobody that matches their level of like catering to the athletes, making sure like this is all you focus on. They don't ask you to sell tickets. They have an entire staff that is literally built around catering to the athletes fight week. If you need something, like somebody will go get it. You don't have to run around anything. They definitely treat it like more of a professional sports organization. You know, NFL players aren't going like, I need tape, and they have to go to the store and get tape, where most promotions you do. I say tape, but any little thing. The UFC is like, we already got a runner going to get it. As soon as you tell them, done. Their medicals are great. I enjoyed it a lot. You know, I happy with my career, but I'm not over the moon about it. You know, I would always want to win everything, and I got some big opportunities that I didn't capitalize on, so that's my own fault. But I still have a good relationship with them. You know, they'll still, if I want tickets to a fight or anything, they'll give them to me. I still talk with Mick Maynard, and I've got a good relationship with Dana and stuff. But it was my job to keep winning, and I went through a losing streak at the end of it, and so they released me. And I don't feel upset about it at all. Like I said, they gave me the opportunities, and it's my job to make something out of it.
Yeah, and so post UFC, where do you go? Do you go right to BareKnuckle?
No, post UFC, I went to Glory Kickboxing. Actually, I don't know if you remember them.
Yeah, of course.
Oddly enough, too, I'd trained kickboxing and Muay Thai since the beginning, but I had never competed kickboxing. So a lot of people thought I was crazy for that, because then I signed with Glory. People were like, "Do you want to do a couple kickboxing fights or anything before?" I'm like, "No, like I'm used to being in the UFC. I had 20 UFC fights. I was like, I fought on the biggest stages in the world. I mean, I fought on some of the massive cards. You know, I fought on the card when Cain Velasquez beat Brock Lesnar, the GSP Diaz card. The GSP Diaz, I think, was like 55,000 people when I was the first fight on the pay-per-view. So I had big show experience.
Where was that?
Montreal. Yeah, I fought on that card when Stephan Bonner fought Anderson Silva in Rio. But there was Minotauro Nogueira on it, Shogun, Anderson Silva. That crowd in Rio matched 55,000 people in Montreal. I mean, the stadium was rumbling from the locker room underneath. So I was like, no, I'm ready to kickbox, you know. I've been a striker. And so my first fight with Glory was at MSG, Madison Square Garden, which was a really cool experience. So I was with Glory for, I think, 2 years, up until COVID. And then, you know, after that, they stopped coming to the US, and we kind of parted ways. I never contacted them anymore. I was ready to get back to MMA, and they didn't contact me. So I guess my contract expired. So then I started fighting in Russia.
What was happening in Russia? What was going on over there?
So back then it was called ACA. Now it's called ACB. Very shady promotion, you know. It's everything that you could imagine. If you've seen Icarus, then like there were guys like shooting up in the locker room, and I'm like, my coaches and like some other Americans were like, what is going on? Like,
dude, is this like comparable to the stuff you see on Instagram now where people are just starching each other at the stare downs? Just like people throwing head kicks at the stare downs?
Yeah, I've seen those. And I think that's all just for, I don't know what that is, because it seems to happen every time. And they're wearing like ski masks and stuff. Yeah, I would say it's kind of close to the shadiness. I mean, they would pay you in cash, and yeah, real weird. Where I was like, after a few, I'm like, I think I'm done coming here. You felt like you were going to get killed like every time. Yeah, I think they're still around. Or it was called ACB when I fought for them. I think it's ACA now. They have a lot of really good fighters that you've never heard of that are like 30-0 and stuff too, which is like a big risk. So I left there, and then where did I go after that? I went to PFL. So I was in their tournament right after COVID, like the first season back.
And how'd you like that?
It's tough for me to say because I hated it in a sense, but I hated it because of the times in the world, right? So it was COVID. So respect to them. I'm not saying I hate them, but trying to run a show when there's so much unknown. So the first fight of the season, we had to quarantine in the hotel 17 days before the fight.
My God.
None of my coaches could go. You had to be locked up in a hotel room, basically. And then, my coaches run gyms and businesses and stuff. So either you had to be locked up or you had to show up the day of the fight. So, my jiu-jitsu coach and my striking coach were like, listen, I understand, but I can't be away from my family, my business, all this stuff. So my girlfriend and I quarantined together, and then I've been in the sport so long, so I knew a lot of the guys there. So I started like jumping in and just cross training wherever I could to get ready for the fight. So it's just desperate times, desperate measures, but it was a good experience because, again, it goes back to that tenacity of like, it doesn't matter. I'm going to make it work. Like, I'm showing up. Yeah. And I did well there. And, the next season after the one I was in, I beat, some of the semifinalists and stuff. They told me I was in, and then literally, I don't know, it was like a month before we decided to part ways. It was kind of mutual. And then from there I went to, I think it was BKFC after that.
Right. That's an amazing journey through all those organizations. And it's interesting to me how things, even how BareKnuckle is coming, is becoming so popular, because it's like, it's full circle. It's very cyclical how we're now getting back to like BareKnuckle fighting, just like people did in bars and had Donniebrooks back in the day. Now it's like, it's coming full circle back to just two guys getting in a ring with no gloves on, swinging at each other.
Yeah. So they had actually approached me before PFL, and the money wasn't there yet. They were pretty new. And I was like, I don't know, maybe. We left it at a maybe, and then we didn't really talk again. I wasn't pushing for it because the money wasn't that great. But then I did PFL. They got to grow. And then they came back to me with like a lot more money. And I was like, all right, I'm in. Because I was a fan. I watched every show.
Did you?
I was like, this is awesome. Yeah, because it was, even now, I feel like it's great. Even if you don't know the people, a lot of people are starstruck, right? They want to see the big stars fight. There's something about going to local shows and then like BareKnuckle shows where like local shows, the talent isn't UFC talent, but they're guys like going for broke. It's like watching college football instead of the NFL. You're watching guys trying to make it. So they're literally like, their finger could be snapped off and they're trying to go back out there. Like you see a ton of heart and like just brawls. And that's what BKFC is, even with the high level.
Yeah. And I was wondering, like, is that model, is that a sustainable model for fighters? Can you get in that and actually have a career in BareKnuckle? I mean, with sort of the unique damage that you take when you put knuckle to eye socket, you're gonna get cut. You're gonna get, just like Eddie Alvarez just got his orbital broken last week. You're gonna take that sort of damage sometimes. How long can you stretch that sort of career out, or is that just sort of like a pit stop?
Yeah, that's actually, I'm glad you asked. That's a good question because my theory on it is it's not sustainable if you're new. The sport, like BKFC, is not at the point where like undercard guys make a lot of money, right? So beginning guys aren't getting paid a ton. It's not worth it to me. And then it's also because I'll get messages from guys like young kids that are like, I want to be a BKFC fighter. I'm like, build your name in boxing, kickboxing, MMA, then come over. You don't want to start your career there because I'm a firm believer, like, what's the most you're going to do? 10, I think, is what we're seeing now. And you have to be real good because the damage you take, cuts and
You're gonna get that scar tissue built up, and you can't do that early in your career, man. You're just gonna bleed out.
yeah, and the money, like you can make more in MMA and stuff right now on some shows than you could being an entry level BKFC fighter. So I would not recommend entering there, but I love fighting for them. I love fighting for them right now where I'm at. I enjoy it a ton. But yeah, I tell all the guys at my gym, like the younger kids and stuff, I'm like, it's great that you love the BKFC and everything, but like get some experience first. Don't start fighting bare knuckle right off the bat because you can break your hands too. Like it's not even the damage that you sustain like to your face. Broken hands. If you're not like precise with your punch, you hit an elbow or anything like the point of an elbow, your hand is going to be shattered, and then you're out a year.
Back in the day before I started training jiu-jitsu, I used to get into some fights too. I got into a fight one time, had a couple of drinks. I hit this dude. He goes down. I go back to my car and I go to drive away, and I can't even grip the steering wheel. My thumb was like in my forearm because I obviously hit this dude wrong.
Oh,
But I'm going to have surgery the next day, and my hand is fucked. So, and when I watch you fight bare knuckle, and I watch maybe a guy like Mike Perry fight bare knuckle, you're keeping your hands more loose until you hit, and he's keeping them super tight when he hits, or when he's actually moving around. Have you had, like, how have you learned how to punch and how to hold your hands? Have you played with it? What's the actual way that you've learned to punch where you're not getting that damage?
yeah. So I would give a lot of credit to my coach, Jake Ramos here in Denver. So his background is boxing. He's mostly a striking coach, but he's great at what he does. And when I first signed with BKFC, it was myself, Brandon Gertz, Marcus Edwards. We had a few guys from the gym on the same card. And so he like really put his head to watching a ton of old fights and starting to figure out how to do it. So we actually did change, which was tough for me in the beginning, change the way I punch a bit. He came up with his own like hand wrap for bare knuckle fighting because you can wrap, but you can't wrap the knuckles. So a lot of these guys now, they just go with like some tape on there. He'll do a full regular like boxing hand wrap, but from like here down. So my wrist, like we use gauze, everything. Most of these guys are still just putting like a couple pieces of tape because they think it's minimal. And what that does is like that protects me, not my opponent. But we really put a lot of emphasis on, it's always hard to show on camera, but normally when I would punch in MMA, it'd be here. With bare knuckle, I'm trying to turn it so far because if I over exaggerate it, if I turn it here, I'm probably going to hit my pinky. If I turn it here, I'm more likely to hit this. Like you overshoot because you know that realistically you're going to undershoot. So even with uppercuts, like in MMA and boxing, you throw an uppercut like this. I turn my wrist as far as I can because I'm trying to hit the center knuckle on everything. So we had to change the way I punch, and then defense. You don't see as much like blocking with BKFC, right? Because the hole is too big. If I hold a boxing glove right here, it covers like my face. Even with an MMA glove, and the MMA glove, you have padding and tape. So if somebody hits it, it doesn't matter. But bare knuckle, if I block and you punch my hand, you could break my hand. So I think head movement is actually more important than blocking. And then, like you said, keeping the open hands. So when I throw a punch, I close it at the last minute. I feel like that gives me a little bit more like snap on it. It makes it faster. and then I can also parry. So parrying I think is good, but the like cover, you can't shell up. All the boxers that you see come to BKFC that try the like shell up defense and then counter. There's too many holes in
Can
there.
you grab wrists? Are you allowed to grab?
Yeah.
You can. Well, that's a big advantage.
Yeah, so coming from jiu-jitsu too, I was telling my coaches, I was like, I want to figure out a way to choke people in the clinch where I'm not like physically choking them, but I haven't figured out a way yet. But the tie clinch has been big for me.
I've noticed that.
I've come up with my own style a little bit using some stuff from like Muay Thai, MMA, and jiu-jitsu. I figured out how to get the throat a little bit. I'm not going to finish anybody with it, but I can make it uncomfortable for you.
Yeah, you're really good with your head, and your clinch work is amazing. I'm sure that clinch has been super beneficial for you, where you're able to tie guys up and really, go from collar tie basically to uppercut or just shots. It seems very effective.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more in-depth things that like you'll understand. I don't know if like the viewers would, but there's little things in there. Like I said, if before the ref breaks us, if your head's down, I'm like riding my thumb across your neck. I'm trying to like cut your breathing off a little bit. I might give it a little like pop before I let it go, just as like as a little going away present. It's a psychological game too. If I can make you be like, hey, start complaining to the ref about something.
Yeah.
I know that I'm in your head and you're not thinking about the fight. You're thinking about all the other little things that I'm doing. And they're not against the rules.
Yeah, I mean, we are getting a bit technical. Like, as far as number one, the straight shots versus the hooks, do you feel like straight shots are not as effective as hooks because you're coming in with just a little bit more of a blunt force, and that might be worse for your hand than actually throwing hooks? Or can you still throw straights bare knuckle?
Yeah, you can. You just got to be precise with it. So David Feldman actually said this. Unfortunately, I've taken credit for it and forgot to mention that he said it. He told me one time the BKFC is like a game of centimeters, where they call football and everything a game of inches. He's like, because you have to be so precise with your punches. Like I was saying earlier, if you clip an elbow or what, it doesn't land. Like even anybody listening to this, like punch your friend in the forearm. Like it might hurt their forearm, but it's gonna hurt your hand. If you miss, it hurts. So having that like accuracy, right? You got to be a sniper in there.
Do you kind of naturally pull punches because you know that damage is possible? Or are you throwing with just fucking everything you have?
Both, right? So with the experience that I have, I might make the decision to like, all right, I'm gonna throw my cross. I'm gonna throw it hard. And when I see like them turn, that's when like, I mean, we're talking like hair of a second here. I'm like, oh shit. Like I see it and I pull it a little bit. But if I see like a clean lane to land, I'm throwing it hard.
Right. I think that's the other thing with the sort of setup of bare knuckle. It's 5 2-minute rounds.
Yeah, which is great.
Do you feel like you have enough time to work and do what you have to do and get in there and be aggressive and kind of wear on guys? I mean, do you have enough time to actually fight your kind of fight?
A little bit. I mean, they go real quick, right? So my last fight, when I fought Lorenzo Hunt for the title,
Tough dude, man.
yeah, he's tough. I mean, I want that one back. I'm pushing for that one again.
I bet you do.
I mean, split decision. I could do better, but there was a point in there where fighting 5 rounds, 5-2s, they go by so quick, right? So between rounds, if you go back and watch, I'm asking my coach in between, I'm like, what round is it? What round? Like 2 minutes, because I wasn't tired at all. 5-2s is what I'm used to doing 2 rounds in. MMA is 3-5s, a non-title fight. And then you get a minute in between. So you literally get half the rest. So everybody out there, CrossFitters and stuff, like you do, 2-to-1 intervals. You feel great if you're in shape. But I lost track of like what round it was, everything. I kept asking like, is it 3? Is it 4? When we finished round 5, I thought it was 4. So I thought there was another round. And that's just, I would say that's lack of experience on my part. I'll criticize myself. That's a lack of my experience because he didn't have that problem. He had done it so many times, like he knew what round it was.
But yeah, watching that fight, it was a great fight. It felt like the longer it would go, the better you would get. and it just seemed like the way that you were fighting him, it needed a little bit more time to cook.
Definitely. And that's my fault. I mean, credit to him, actually. You know, him and I still talk shit to each other and everything, but I'll give him a lot of credit because he brought that championship experience. And then a lot of things that I planned on working didn't work. And that was due to like his preparation, you know, because I'm not going to say I trained wrong, but I planned on certain things working and they didn't. And that's part of being a professional, you know, is being able to make the adjustments on the fly. I didn't make the right adjustments, and then he stayed forward with what he was doing. So, you know, I'll give him credit on winning. He won't win a second time, but I'll give him the credit on that one.
Are you guys going to run it back?
I've been trying. He doesn't want to. I don't really know why, because, I mean, he wants to go to heavyweight. So, again, he's the double champion there. Does he deserve it? Yeah, I mean, what he's done for BKFC is, you know, big for all of us. I'll definitely give him those props, but if he goes to heavyweight, I'm still going to be here, you know. So we'll see each other again at some point. Even if he vacates the title, I'll win it, and then when he wants to come back down, he's first in line because I want that fight again. I know I beat that guy. And I think BKFC should add elbows. We should do all upper body.
100%, man. It's already very, very, very interesting, but just those little additions would just add a whole nother dimension to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they dabbled with it a little bit in their last Thailand card. They had Sanchai and Buakaw fight, and they did mixed rules. So it was bare knuckle, but they allowed elbows and knees.
Oh,
I think at least elbows should be a thing, like all upper bodies. So then you don't have to worry about the lower body.
that's very interesting, dude. Bare knuckle fighting. It's so old. Have you ever seen that documentary Knuckle about like the Irish travelers
Yeah.
talking shit to each other and then they just get it on bare knuckle? It's like, it's such an old thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's great. And here's the thing, like, I'll say this now. Originally, my first two fights with BKFC were quick knockouts, right? So I didn't even really take punches. I wasn't worried about it because I'm like, this isn't the first time I've been punched with a bare fist, you know? You and I, people that do these sports, we've all probably most likely gotten in a fight. It's hard to find somebody in the sport that has never been in a street fight. So I was like, I've been punched plenty of times, probably a lot, but yeah. But it's, if people think bare knuckle is so brutal, and it's really not. I mean, it is, but it's not, because when you watch the UFC, so I'm going to the UFC, I leave tomorrow for Vegas, but when you watch the UFC, I can grab your head and I can knee you in the face. There's no pad on my knee. I can elbow you. I can elbow you when your head is on the ground, where there's nowhere for your head to go other than the back of your head hitting the mat. I can elbow you way harder than I can punch, and there's no pad on your elbow. So I think it's more of a like novelty that people are like, oh my God, bare knuckle.
It's a little bit more cosmetically, like, just it's more bloody maybe, but it's not the damage of like CTE, like concussions that you would see in like those in the UFC or in MMA, right?
Or slap fighting, you know?
Dude, slap fighting.
I got to throw that in there because so BKFC or bare knuckle fighting is not legal in Nevada, but slap fighting is.
Dude, slap fighting has to be the dumbest shit I've ever seen. It's so bad.
The absolute dumbest shit ever. You don't even get a chance for defense. It's just like a pissing contest.
Dude, those guys are fucked when they get older. They're so fucked.
And they make no money. I mean, from what I heard, the winners get like $2,000.
I was so surprised that they went so hard on that and so all in.
Yeah, and I think it's overhyped by like a media company, because I don't know one person that watches it. I don't know if you do. I don't know one person that tunes in.
Yeah, it feels like a social media clip thing, like where I see the clips all the time, but I never have tuned in.
I don't see it lasting. And it's shocking to me that that's legalized, because, again, there's no chance for defense at all. They give them like a little like pool noodle to put behind their back and hold, and they wear like a mouthpiece, and then you're just taking shots. Like, you know what would absolutely not be legal is if we punched each other in the face. For some reason, they think an open hand is fine. But on my podcast, or my old podcast, I interviewed some of the people that have been winning on there, and they're not hitting like a slap. They're hitting like the heel of their hand.
They're doing a palm strike.
Yeah, ask Boss Rudin about it. Boss Rudin's knocked out plenty of people. I mean, you got a bone right here. So it's not exactly the slap that most people are thinking of. And it is the dumbest shit I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's wild. There's one clip of a guy who's, I don't know if they do slap for slap, how many times they do it, or it's a round situation, but the dude's face
His
was,
cheek and face.
yeah, right. You saw that one? That dude's face is fucking, it's so bad.
I don't think that was Dana's slap fight, but that was another country. But a friend of a friend who's kind of in the know told me that, yeah, that guy got $2,000. I was like, what's he going to buy? Like a used 1990 CRX? Like, congratulations, you won.
I mean, they're signing up for it, right? I mean, that's the other argument, is that they want to do it. They want to provide for their families however they want to do it. So I whatever. I think it's terrible, but
I call it natural selection.
right.
You will never, I mean, if they're offer millions, don't get me wrong, we're all like a whore in our own way. If they're offering millions, I might be in there, but you know, for a couple grand, even 50 to 100 grand, that's real questionable.
Yeah, dude, you're taking such ridiculous damage.
Yeah, there's not that much skill.
No.
We could go on this all day.
I know this is. I'm glad you're equally as outraged about how ridiculous it is, because I tell everybody, and I don't know, whatever. It is what it is. What are you up to these days, man? What do you like to do when you're not fighting? What do you see yourself doing when you eventually stop fighting? Are you going to miss fighting? Talk us through where you're at right now in your life.
It's definitely, I will definitely miss it, right? So I think, you know, as I get older, I think about being an athlete, which I think every athlete goes through when you get to the point where you're not competing anymore, because it's not my identity, but it's made me who I am. And again, I think I have, you know, year, 2 years left, but still, even when I think like 2 years from now of stopping, I'm like, man, that's going to suck. Like, cause you're not going to feel like the man anymore, kind of, or like just whatever. I'm still going to train, but, you know, these days, like I said, I've always owned my own businesses. I've always worked. So I do well for myself, and I'm always thinking ahead. So I do commercial real estate here in Denver with a brokerage called Hoff and Lee. And I've been enjoying that because it is like a competitive market, right? It's things that I do it a little different too. I don't just like get a building and then wait for calls. If I get a building that is up for sale, I start calling people that I think would be good fit for it.
Calling those promoters all over again.
Literally, yeah. I'm like, hey, you know what? Like, I don't know if you're looking or not, but I think that like this would be a great fit for you, because like it doesn't hurt to ask. One thing, like fighting, losing on national television, losing on pay-per-view in front of millions of people will make you not shy, right? I'm not scared to hear the word no, which a lot of people, I would say they say public speaking is the biggest fear. But yeah, I bet rejection's actually even bigger. Most people just never think they'll even public speak, so they're not worried about it. Hearing the word no is terrifying to people. I don't give a shit. I'll call 500 people and get no every single time, but I only need one yes. So I've really been enjoying that, because I love Denver, and I have a really big community here. I feel like I know everybody in the city. I don't actually know everybody in the city, but I know a lot of people. So it's fun because I've already been able to help some friends that own businesses like get what they want, and not giving a shit about my commission, being able to negotiate like as low as I can for them, but help them out. And then I still make money. It's kind of like it's like being in the locker room at the gym. Like you're helping out your buddies, your training partners, this, that, like, so that's been really fun, and I've been enjoying it, but I still train full time. I will, you know, at least for the next 2 years or so. I want to go out. My goal literally since 2005 or 6, whenever I started, was when I'm done with this sport, I want to leave on my own terms. I don't want to get knocked out so many times that they won't sanction me to fight, or people are begging me to stop. You know, my table's glass, but knock on wood, I've never been knocked out. I've never been dropped.
What's the hardest you've ever been hit?
Off the top of my head, when I fought Jesse Forbes on that HDNet fight, I don't think it even exists on the internet anymore, but the very first punch of the fight, like we shuffled to the center. It was in a boxing ring, and he hit me with a cross, and I spun in a circle. It didn't rock me or anything, but I remember getting hit and my entire body like spun around and thinking like, what the fuck? Like, and maybe that sticks out in my head because before that I was fighting like mostly locally, and then I fight like a guy that's been fighting on a world level, but I had never been hit like that. And you know, he's a big jack dude, so it made me go in a full circle.
Dude, well, congratulations on such a great career. Again, I think your kind of career is the stuff that really is, it's what I enjoy watching. And the fighters that I really love are guys like you, and really make it an enjoyable sport for guys like us to watch and get motivated by, because again, it's the fighter spirit. You're going to bring that into real estate too. It's all about that mindset. But congrats, man. It's been good, and you're not done yet, but congrats on a great career.
Thank you. You know, I got at least one more thing on my list. Like I said, I'm going to win that BKFC belt before I'm done. Lorenzo, he can avoid it or whatever. I don't care. He can leave. I'm winning it. But when he comes back, actually, I'm going to add that to the list because I don't want to just win the belt. Because if he vacates it, I still want to fight him again, and I'll beat him the next time. But, you know, you got to set these little goals and milestones, you know, for everybody out there.